Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pediatric Speech Sisters Show. I am so excited to have the ladies of the Bold SLP Collective here. I reached out to them because they are doing amazing work. And when I had the privilege of being a guest on their show, they were mentioning that there is a course going on behind the scenes. So now we are very excited for it to come out in June.
Yeah.
Yes, in June. So I'll go ahead and let you all introduce yourselves. Please give me grace. This is my first time interviewing more than one other person, but please take your time.
I can go first. My name is Ingrid Owens Gonzalez, in Spanish, Ingrid. I am a bilingual SLP, Spanish bilingual. I'm school based, mostly K through 5. I have experience in preschool and middle school and early intervention. I also have my own private practice, kind of consulting on the side. And I am the co host of the Bold SLP podcast along with Liza and Desi, also one of the co founders for BEAM, Bilingual Empowerment Through Allied Mentorship SLP program. And I've been in the field since 2011.
I'll follow up. I'm Desi Peña. I'm a speech language pathologist, also Spanish bilingual. I have worked in a lot of different settings, mostly with pediatric kiddos. So I have worked in preschool, done some early elementary work, and some of that has been in person as well as teletherapy. I've worked a little bit with middle school and high school, and I also did home health for a little while. I also am part of the BEAM mentorship program as a mentor, and I also co host the Bold SLP podcast. This is my 5th year as an SLP.
My name is Liza Salvaraja. I'm a speech therapist in Quebec, Canada. We rarely say bilingual here because it's kind of a given that you speak French and English here, but I will say it because it's part of what we do. So I'm a bilingual SLP. I have a private practice called Montreal Speech Therapy, and I also work in the schools. I was initially a teacher, and so I worked a lot in that respect in the schools, and then moved into speech therapy. I worked in pediatric, early intervention, high school, elementary. Right now, it's kind of a mix of everything, but my favorite population right now is the autistic population. And I'm just realizing, like, I rarely say Liza Salvaraja. I always just say Liza. I'm like trying to make it easy on everyone, but it's what we're doing. Got to say it all.
Yeah, you have a very cool last name, by the way,
Thank
Silverado.
you.
That's something I would want to brag about, actually. Well, thank y'all so much for coming. I do want to ask about BEAM. For anyone who's listening to this and might be interested in BEAM, can you tell us quickly about that?
Yeah, Lisa did mention she's also one of the mentors
I
at
know,
BEAM.
sorry.
Oh, okay. So we're
And
all
I co-host the Bold SLP with you too.
okay. Thank you.
BEAM stands for Bilingual Empowerment Through Allied Mentorship SLP program, and it was founded by Sarah Gonzalez. She's an SLP, bilingual SLP in New York. And so her whole idea in starting BEAM was helping other bilingual SLPs students, because a lot of us end up going to placements and we're the only bilingual even in our CF years. And that was kind of her goal. And then from there, it grew and grew and grew. And now it's been since summer of 2021. And we've mentored hundreds of students. And we have a roster of rotating about 70 bilingual, bicultural SLPs. And bilingual, bicultural is a very important mission for BEAM. We want to support students who are bilingual heritage speakers from minoritized, marginalized backgrounds.
What would you say are the biggest challenges when the students come into the program? What would you say are their biggest challenges and how you help them with that?
I don't know if you guys want to
I
ask.
know.
I have a lot.
It's a newish program. So some of the students don't really know what exactly they're looking for. They just know that they need a mentor who looks like them and has similar experiences. So some of them come in very shy, very introverted. So it's on us to get them to open up a little bit. So that was one of the challenges for me.
Yeah. And I'd say the other one, in addition to finally connecting with somebody who looks like them, it's also the first question is, how do I do these bilingual evaluations? How do I become a bilingual clinician? My program has no training in the area of bilingualism or multiculturalism. That's usually where I kind of catch my mentees.
For me, it's been a range, but my first mentee that I took on the summer that Sarah and I were just doing it on Instagram, the program didn't have a name, was all of these students who are, well, mine in particular, are Mexican American, because we try to connect with our same culture and same backgrounds. My mentee was Mexican American, and she was being told left and right that she wasn't enough, that she wouldn't make it, that her accent was too much of this, that her academics were not good enough. And so that has been the biggest challenge, because I've been a step mentor as well. And that's also a theme that I've found with my students that I mentor, that they find people once they make it to grad school who are constantly just undermining their skills. Yeah.
That's very disheartening, but I'm so thankful that Beam even exists. I know when I was in grad school, we did have a course. It was like it was a bilingualism course, and you actually had to be chosen to be in the course, which was really a disadvantage for people who would want to or be interested in being bilingual. So I'm happy that this at least exists and that y'all are able to come and tell us about it on the show.
Yeah, we always shout out Beam. We're all very involved with it.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about the Bold SLP Collective and how that even became a group in a podcast?
That's a Desi question.
Yeah.
I giggled because it came to my mind in like discussions with Ingrid over time. We had actually been very active on Clubhouse, which is an app that I'm not sure how many people are very familiar with it. It went through a high point at near the end of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started, a bilingual SLP group, Ingrid did, on Clubhouse. And so there came weekly meetings, and at those meetings, people kept asking about different topics. People had questions. There were accounts on Instagram that were promoting career advancement through learning Spanish with a non-native speaker who didn't integrate culture or anything about cultural humility into her coursework that she was offering for folks. So because of just the number of different things that were coming at us, either through connecting with other colleagues or through, different things that were going on the platform still during the time of the pandemic, we found an opening where we thought we really need to be a voice, be a unified voice, thus the idea behind the collective. And in thinking about, how we wanted to promote our message, we asked Liza if she'd be a part of it. So that's mostly, I spoke very generally, but that's how it came about.
Well, why bold? Why the word bold?
Oh,
That
that's
was
an even
me.
better question. Okay. It's like, what?
Okay, so we were looking, I still have the little notes. We were looking for words that started with B. And this was even before Beam came about. It was a year before Beam, but just something B, bilingual B. And we were looking also for mission, anything that would help these students that we were coming across. And in the notes, I had written one of them. I'm going to say it. I don't know that anyone would take it, but it was certified, like CCCs. And then we were like, that sounds like certifiable and not so great. And then I had to put bold community or bold SLPs. And then Desi was like, I'm going to drop an organization that I found on there. And it was bold.org, and they're a nonprofit. And I was like, that's it, Desi. Like, we were both working on separate things. And then once we dumped it into a note together, I was like, a bold, that's it. That's what we need to be.
What I love about your name, the Bold SLP Collective, is it seems like every single guest, first of all, it seems like all three of y'all are very bold, and what you do is very bold to create a podcast. It's very bold to create a course. And so every single guest that you have on there are very bold in nature. So it seemed like that was almost intentional. It's pretty intentional how
It
you
was
all.
serendipitous, and then now we've kind of just taken it on. And Desi really wanted to add, because we're bold and humble. Like if you look on the tagline, it's bold plus humble, like because of cultural humility. So we kind of, that's how it fit together.
Wow.
I do remember like constantly being scared before I met Ingrid and Desi, scared to speak up, scared to share my views, my thoughts. And then when Clubhouse came around, I mean, everyone was going through the same thing and we empowered each other. And so I really did feel that bold was the perfect word because I don't think any of us are scared anymore to say anything. Like we just speak the truth and hope that it resonates enough with people to want to make change.
You know, one thing, and I haven't told you all this before. I remember it was in my clinical fellowship year, and someone actually mentioned your podcast to me, and it was really in the terms of being bold and multicultural. It was a Black woman actually who told. So the work you all doing it's just necessary and needed, and especially for the younger SLPs in the field who needs that hope. Because like you said, Lisa, and I've talked to other guests where it's scary. It's scary to speak out because we don't want to be fired, or we just don't want anything bad to happen to our careers or even our just livelihoods. So thank you all for creating that platform and safe space for your guests and even for your listeners.
Yeah. And we have it as a goal for our podcast to really find ways to highlight SLPs who are minorities, SLPs of color, SLPs who are Black, just SLPs who are of marginalized backgrounds, just because, as you know, most of the platforms that are out there really center white people, people who do not come from a different ethnic background, do not come from a different racial background, linguistic background. So that's really the mission that we have. And you're right. I think the common thread is that all of our guests have been bold, and we hope to keep it that way.
Well, I do want to get into the courses that y'all already put together in your collaboration with SLP Nerdcast. Can you tell us a bit about that and how that even came about?
It was the podcast. I think we started putting out our podcast and the Instagram, and Kate, she's one of the founders of SLP Nerdcast. She had reached out and she was so kind. She said, I love what you guys are doing. If you ever want to Zoom, like I won't gatekeep. Here's what we use. And I knew of their podcast because of Desi. Oddly enough, she had said, listen to their podcast, or there was one that really resonated with her. And she said, I really would like for us to get to a place where we can be educational like this. And so I was listening to some of their stuff. And then Kate and I Zoomed one winter day. It was over winter break. And from then on, it was just a collaboration that grew organically, connecting with the three of us. And then we ended up doing 2 episodes on their podcast. It was supposed to be 1, and then it just turned into 2. And 2 episodes turned into let's create a course together. And it's been wonderful working with Amy and Kate.
Well, I was just going to say they were so open-minded, just so open to what we had to say and just reflecting on, you know, their own privilege, their own biases. They were just like soaking it all. It was amazing to see. And then at the end of that, she was like, I think you 3 need to give a course. Like there's a lot more that we can talk about. And you're right, Ingrid, like it was supposed to be 1 episode, but then there was too much that we wanted to share. And then after the 2nd episode, it was like, girls, we need to talk. We have a project.
There's like so much to do. So, what was my question? Oh my gosh, y'all, I'm neurodivergent, so I forget my question sometimes. Um, my question was when it became no, what is the title of the course or what's the title of the podcast episode?
The podcast episode, I actually remember it because it made such an impact on me. And I was like, wow, all content should be this good. It was Dr. Chelsea Prevet. And I don't know the number of the episode, but it is an SLP Nerdcast episode about language ideology. So I think at that point, she may have still been a doctoral student. And she just really broke down all of the different ways in which our own bias and perceptions of language really can interfere in language evaluations. So it was such a good course. But the name of our course is Strategies to Prevent Harm in Bilingual and Multicultural Evaluations.
So that brings me to my next question is what harm do you typically see when it comes to bilingual evaluations?
Cultural
I
erasure.
love to tell my story of the pendulum that swings because I've been in the field for 12 years and I see it that our students who are emergent bilinguals either get under-identified because everybody's waiting on them and spreading the myth that because they're in a bilingual home, they're in a silent stage and, give them more time. And so there's students who miss out on early intervention. And then the pendulum swings the other direction where students, just because they are bilingual, they get tested and tracked into a disability, even though there's no problem with their language. The only difference is that they are more comfortable in another language that's not English. So that is kind of the two basic ways that harm presents itself in our setting, in my setting, early intervention, preschool and schools. But I would say one of the biggest ways that harm is, caused to these families is by making them feel like they're not enough, making them feel like their culture is wrong and their culture is causing problems with their children's learning. Whenever we don't dig deep and understand bilingualism and understand linguistic oppression and the history of linguistic oppression in our country, I feel like that's the biggest harm that we can cause as language professionals is make families feel less than and erase language and culture from our patients and clients and students.
And I wanted to say that what's really challenging about talking about these topics is that there are people who, even if they don't engage in expressing these harmful ideas, like Ingrid's saying, there are people who don't understand and that they may carry bias, regardless of whether they do think that there is a deficit that comes from being bilingual. I've met plenty of people who will say, no, there's no issue with bilingualism, but they may carry harmful implicit biases against people of different backgrounds, especially people of color. So I think it's something that we really tried to focus on in our course because it doesn't have to be a habit per se. It can just be kind of stewing in the back of your mind without you even recognizing that it's there.
I think another harmful thing is the over-reliance on irrelevant external evidence or data. It's just what's made it mainstream is just what people use. And a lot of it doesn't even apply to the students that we're working with. A lot of the recommendations have nothing to do with the families that we're working with. It's just easy, to pick up an old article or something that's always been used and continue on that way. And it's not right. And it is very harmful.
I really appreciate the work you're doing. As y'all are talking, there are so many questions that are coming to my head. And at the same time, I'm like, I don't want them to give away their course for free. So let me not ask too many questions. But the first question I have is what does it typically look like? So let's just say, for example, I'm an SLP who has that implicit bias and doesn't even really recognize it. But so how could I inadvertently put harm? Because a lot of times that looks like me thinking I'm doing a great job. Hey, I know I'm anti-racist and I know I'm doing the work. I'm reading all of these articles that may or may not be valid, but at least I'm trying. So how does that look?
Yeah. Well, hopefully they are reading those articles.
Mhm.
But I would say that in my experience, it's been that talk of, oh, the family told me that they don't speak that language at home. So we definitely don't need to be testing in that language. Or then they might say, oh no, it turns out that that child that I evaluated does speak that language at home. And then it turns into sometimes like an eye roll because they're upset about that. Or it may be that they, have to kind of backtrack and then find an interpreter. So it's things like that that I find it may look like that on the front end of an evaluation.
Oh, go ahead, Liza.
Yeah, there's a big module on interviewing and how to do that. And there just needs to be more value given to what the family has to say and what their experiences are, and taking that time to listen, and not to be so set in like, I am the authority because I'm the speech and language pathologist and I studied language, and so I'm the one that's setting the standard. That has to be something that you just unlearn and just let it go.
Mhm.
And I was going to say, for me, it's hard to explain, but I think all of us have felt it and have shared our stories of times when we felt it, because we were all emergent bilinguals at some point, dropped at school, not knowing the language of instruction. All three of us have that experience. I think I was 7, Liza was in kindergarten, Desi was in preschool. But we all three have that experience of being dropped in a school where they only speak a certain language that we don't speak. And I've shared how I was older, I was 7, and I could tell which grown-ups didn't like me speaking Spanish around them. And it's not something that you can, they never said anything to me. Well, one of them did. I tell that story on the podcast too. But you can tell which students, which teachers, which SLPs act a certain way when you bring your other language forward. So that's one way to, like, not being intentional about making space for other cultures and other languages. Something as simple as having materials in both languages. If you know that those are the languages that are spoken in your campus, why wouldn't you have things labeled in 2 or 3 languages? Taking that effort to make sure that they know that it's okay to live life with 2 or more languages inside of them. So I don't know how to explain it, but I think we've all felt that feeling. I see it in my children. They know which people are safe to pronounce their Spanish in the correct way, which people are not safe, and where they have to switch and do the English. I have an example with my little one who's, yellow, amarillo. She knows who doesn't like it when she says amarillo, and she'll say amarillo around them. Because even when she was 4, she would get comments about her Spanish. So those are the little things that I think are pervasive. Like Desi was saying, is not that anybody's out there being outwardly like, oh, you don't speak that here. It's just little things that make you feel like, oh, path of least resistance is English always here in the United States.
Wow. Well, I'm very sorry that that is the reality of this country or North America, because I understand you're in Canada, and even it's disheartening too, especially in Canada, because it seems like you said most people are bilingual in Canada with a strong French influence. So I am sorry about that, especially for your little ones who have to carry that on too. Because what I think about when you have to say Amarillo, it's not doing the kid a disservice on learning language in general, or it's not doing the kid a service when they're learning language in general and they have to say Amarillo instead of Amarillo, which is the correct pronunciation. Um, so that does bring me to my next point. Then, how can we uplift bilingual, multicultural patients, clients, students, and families?
I think first acknowledging culture, acknowledging the role that culture plays. We've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but one example that comes off the top of my head is discussions that we've had about cultural food. So when it comes to working with a patient, for example, who has dysphagia, making recommendations based on that person's diet, their own home culture diet, rather than ascribing to them a diet that is a mainstream American diet. These are things that really lead to challenges for people who are navigating a disorder of that kind.
Ingrid's story about us being dropped in schools where that it's not our first language. I shared this story on the podcast too, but I didn't know the word for ant or insect in French when I was in school. So I was like, oh no, c'est un, and then I said Poochie. And the fact that the teachers or nobody used any kind of logic to say that must be a word in her language, but everyone was like, we don't know what she's saying, so ridiculous, just random words coming out of kids. So that's very invalidating, right? And at that age I wasn't even sure what language I was speaking. I just assumed it was all language, so I was saying the right thing, and it works at home, so it should work at school. So yeah, just accepting kids, and first of all just listening to the way they speak to see where, what we say, trans language, where it's all happening, instead of jumping to correct and being like, we don't say that here. What does that even mean, we don't say that here? We all speak, we all use language to communicate, and the language that we're using fully works for us at home, so it's still communication.
Mm-hmm. Ingrid, was there something that you wanted to add to that?
No, I love all these stories. I have stories to go with all of it. But I have seen what happens whenever the language is supported. To like add an uplifting note to my Amarillo story, my child is now in a school where she has a Spanish immersion opportunity, and her love for Spanish and her curiosity, like after being kind of squashed in the preschool, has returned. So just that acknowledgement, our school has Hispanic Heritage celebrations. They have Fridays where they do the national anthem, the pledge in different languages. We have all these opportunities, and she's around children who speak other languages. And after going through that hard preschool year, she surprised me so much in kindergarten. She kept telling me about her friend and her friend and her friend. And this friend has a very Spanish name, and she was pronouncing it perfectly. And I was so proud of her. And 2 weeks into school, I finally meet the friend, and I realized the friend does not speak English. So the friend is one of those students who's monolingual Spanish speaker, and then she comes to kindergarten. And I'm like, how are they talking? So she was listening all that year, that preschool year that was so hard, and she was so down on herself, on her Spanish, and I was so down as a mom. She was listening, and she just needed that environment, her peers, that school setting that was like, yeah, this is okay to do. So whatever that looks like for you in your setting, try and make space for it, because it's so valuable to just make space for other ways of languaging.
Space. I don't know how to teach this, and I wish there was a way to not assign like a power dynamic or hierarchy to languages. For some reason, English, French, they're like at the top, and then other ones just fall lower and lower down this arbitrary scale of important languages. I was telling Ingrid and Desi that my daughter was at the park, and we were speaking in French because we're in a French area. And then she said something to me in English. And this woman was so impressed that my daughter was bilingual, but she doesn't speak Tamil, which is my parents' home language. And I wondered if it was Tamil words that came out of her mouth, if that lady would have still been impressed at the bilingualism, or because it was English French. I think it was because it was the English French, because then she went on to say, I wish my daughter would also speak English, but she's only speaking French now. And it just hit me in that moment, oh, there are certain languages that people are excited to be bilingual about, and then others that we hide. As children, you just know, oh, I don't think I'm supposed to speak this at school. I don't want anyone to hear me.
Well, first of all, Lisa, excuse my ignorance. Tamil, right? Is that the name?
Yeah, Tamil.
What's the country of origin?
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. That's right, Sri Lanka. Okay, yeah, it's very beautiful. I don't like how, because even listening to these stories, I'm feeling kind of sad, actually. I'm feeling pretty sad. I do understand that there is an imbalance of power in general. So when it comes to the service providers and the people who are serving, there's an imbalance of power. And sadly, most SLPs, and it's not even just speech pathologists, it's just healthcare providers in general, we like to have that armor, like, I am the doctor here. I am the language expert. I know what I'm talking about. And what I'm studying and understanding and learning is the best way to create those relationships and even to be culturally competent in what we're doing is to give the families the power too. Like they're the best at what they do at home, they're the best at the language that they speak. So even though this child might have a language delay, it's not because they're speaking Spanish at home. It's just because they simply have a language delay that we need to work on and target. So I do appreciate you all coming on and shining light on that because, like you said, there are those implicit biases that we don't even know. We're just kind of conditioned. I say kind of, but we are conditioned to have. So, Lisa, your story sticks out to me the most because, yeah, English and French, that sounds so impressive. Like, oh, wow, that's so impressive. But if you were to say Sri Lanka, just because of colorism and racism and all of that, it would be looked at, it wouldn't be looked at as so cool.
Mhm.
Even though I think that's amazing. I love multilingual people in general. I think they're the most brilliant people on the planet, seriously. The code switching too that children are able to do so quickly, just like that. Incredible. Well, I don't want to keep you ladies for too long. One thing I do want to ask is how can we break those habits as speech pathologists? Those bad habits that we
I
might bring into bilingual evaluations.
I mean, I think the best solution for anything of this nature is to really find yourself as the one person who stands out in the room, right? Go and become immersed in a different culture, not in any sort of awkward or, kind of voyeuristic kind of way, but like in a genuine way, like genuinely find people who are different than you, genuinely try to connect with them and understand. You modeled it the right way, Melanie, asking what country of origin is that language? I'm not really sure. These are things that we don't like to do. We don't like to humble ourselves in those ways. But being someone who is open to having those sorts of interactions and asking questions, I think that's the most important first start for anyone who's hoping to undo these harmful habits within themselves.
Going in as not the savior, but as an ally. That's it.
Mhm.
Like, I'll never forget in the deaf community where I was like, oh, I'm gonna translate everything for everyone. I'm gonna help all the deaf people. And they're like, we have deaf pride. We have our own community. We're good. We just need allies. Like, are you with us or not? I was like,
Mhm.
ooh, you're so right. I'm sorry. But it took a group of deaf friends. It took a deaf community. It took me immersing myself in a place where no one was speaking. Everybody was using their hands and communicating that way. And you can't really learn if you're going in there thinking that I know why I'm here and I'm the best, you know?
Yeah. And for any of you guys who didn't catch it, Liza did just say that she's fluent in ASL. So she's trilingual and bimodal, and she never shouts herself out.
Thanks, Ingrid.
I always shout her out when I can. My advice is to let go of perfectionism. That's not going to be helpful for anybody. It's going to lead, I think it leads a lot of people to just shutting out. And I see it echoed in all the comments every time we bring up an issue. Well, we can't do anything right. And it's like, well, you can do a lot of things right. You just did this one wrong. And so take the feedback and move on. And also saying less and doing more. A lot of people like to say a lot of things, but the actions are not, there's a lot of policy about bilingual learners, and there's a lot of things going on in our field about supporting multilingual SLPs. They just changed our name without telling anybody. But where are the actions? It's what I would do, like do the work and be ready to not be right all the time and be ready to give something of yourself, whether it be time, opportunities, or space for others.
Or maybe
That's
even a
what it takes.
potential sacrifice is what we were talking about in the last few days.
The
Yeah.
what sacrifice?
A potential sacrifice, right? You may need to do some advocacy, and that might put a strain on some of the relationships, ideally not. But, there are so many of us who make sacrifices to make sure that people understand that culture and language really matter. being actively anti-racist matters, and these things have to be said. And I really hope that people can understand that without doing these active steps, there really isn't a way forward, especially in this increasingly multilingual country that we find ourselves in. I mean, even for the course, we'll just kind of give a little teaser. 2 out of 10 children speak in a language that is not English in their home. So that's 20%. The demographics continually change, and it's time for all of us to really upgrade ourselves and do better and be better humans.
Yeah.
Well, thank y'all so much for coming on and sharing. One question I always like to ask is, what is one thing that you would like to see changed in the field?
One thing.
This sentence to me is like so incredibly triggering, and I would love for no one to ever say it again, but I don't see color.
Oh,
I
gosh.
cannot emphasize enough how harmful that is, and what a difference it will make in your life if you open your eyes and see children for everything that they're bringing. Children, adults, families, people. You need to see them. You need to see their color. You need to see what they've been through. You need to understand their story. You cannot just act like everyone is the same and bringing the same thing to the table. They're not. And that is a huge disservice that you're doing by just having this blanket statement and saying, I don't need to do any work because I don't see color and I treat everyone the same. I have a story about that, but you know what?
Yeah, I do.
Another time.
To piggyback off of that, I have a really close friend of mine here where I live, and she's a dentist. Her family's from Sierra Leone. She recently was admitted into a leadership program for dentists, and there were some pictures posted on Facebook of the participants in her cohort, and it was a multiracial, multi-ethnic group, and it was so wonderful. I even took a screenshot and I messaged it to Ingrid and Liza and said, wow, when will we get there? I remember sitting down and having a conversation with my friend and saying, man, your profession must be really white too. And she said, oh, that when we actually looked at the numbers, like, no, dentistry is nowhere near as white as we are. I mean, it is so far away. I believe that they at least have maybe 20 or 25% of their professionals represented by minorities. So that's where I would like to see a change, just visually speaking, just like Liza, but on our end of things, outwardly what people say and do, but also what people look like, what their backgrounds are.
And to tie it together with that, Desi, I would like to see ASHA take a stronger stance in what's going on at universities. I hear way too much about admissions and grad school issues and clinical instructor issues of discrimination against people because of their race, because of their ethnic backgrounds, because of their language diversity, like if they use AAE or if they have Spanish influenced English, they are called having an accent or not speaking proper. All of that stuff. And then even making room for neurodivergent people in our field and disabled people in our field. That's what I would like to see. We're a field that is supposed to be knowledgeable in all of these things. And how are we not even like collaborating with people in those communities that they don't even come to our field? There's just so much to learn. I tell people all the time, SLPs of all personalities should be here, of all neurodivergent identities, of all, like that's the people that we serve. Our field needs to reflect the communities that we serve.
And just to really just tie it all with what all three of you all said is I think about academia. And so I'm just like, well, why aren't there a lot of multicultural SLPs? Well, when you get into academia, you're pushed out and gatekept or gatekept, either way. So thank you, ladies, for coming on this show And just thank you so much for giving your time and your energy in this course. I'm so excited for it to come out. Is there a specific day yet, or should we follow the Bold SLP Collective to be on the lookout for that?
Yes, do both. Follow us. But the course is going to be released. It's going to be open June 12th. So the last day to register would be up to June 11th.
Okay.
And the early bird rate is up to May 29th, so you can go register now.
Well, everybody watching the replay, I will put that registration link in the show notes. Thank you, ladies, so much, Liza, Desi, Ingrid, for coming on the show. I am so looking forward to see how everything blossoms, and just prayerfully we can add some change to this field.
Thank you so much for having us.
Melanie.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you all. All right. Well, thank you all for coming and watching this live. Until next time.